he hears the secret story and primal thoughts that turned Theodore Robert Cow into Ted Bundy.
When and where was your first murder?
You know what's going to happen if and when all this stuff goes public, if all we did was just hit the who's and the when and the body count?
Ted Bundy was one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, but behind his horrifying crimes was a life that, on the surface, looked completely normal. From his modest childhood home in Washington to the quiet apartment in Utah that hid a dark double life, every place he lived tells a piece of the story. Before Ted Bundy became a name that sent chills down the spine of America, he was just another kid growing up in what looked like a regular suburban life. His early years were spent surrounded by secrets, long before the world would uncover the monstrous reality behind the charming facade. Born in 1946 in Burlington, Vermont, Bundy spent the first few years of his life in Philadelphia, raised by his grandparents under the lie that his mother was his sister. That strange family setup was only the beginning of a life filled with masks and manipulation. By 1950, Bundy and his mother had relocated to Tacoma, Washington, a quiet, unassuming city where he would spend most of his childhood and teen years. It was here in a modest house in a middle-class neighborhood that Bundy began to shape his public persona, polite, intelligent, and completely unthreatening. The house in Tacoma played a huge part in Ted Bundy's early development. It was the setting for his teenage years, the space where he first began experimenting with identity and control. He was an awkward, isolated teen, fascinated by power and deeply insecure. The environment he grew up in may not have been luxurious, but it was stable and quiet, almost too quiet, considering what was happening behind the scenes. After high school, Bundy stayed close to home, enrolling at the University of Puget Sound, and later transferring to the University of Washington in Seattle. While in college, he bounced between different apartments around the Seattle area, always blending in and never drawing attention. During this time, he was actively involved in politics, even volunteering for a campaign, another mask to help him appear clean-cut and respectable. These early residences in Seattle were the beginning of Bundy's double life. Behind the closed doors of those ordinary-looking apartments, Bundy was already beginning to plan, fantasize, and act out some of his darkest thoughts. At this point, he hadn't yet become the infamous killer we know today, but the groundwork was being laid, step by step, in these quiet suburban settings. When Ted Bundy moved to Salt Lake City, Utah in September of 1974, he was trying to start fresh, or at least that's what he wanted people to believe. He had enrolled at the University of Utah's law school, telling friends and family that he was focused on building a future in law and politics. But behind that confident smile and polished demeanor, the darkness he'd managed to keep hidden in Washington was growing stronger and far more dangerous. Bundy moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment at 565 First Avenue in Salt Lake City. The building itself wasn't anything special. Tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, it looked like any other low-key complex in the area. From the outside, it was the kind of place you'd walk past without giving a second thought. But inside, it became the backdrop of some of the most disturbing chapters in Bundy's life. Neighbors described Bundy as polite, clean-cut, and intelligent. He didn't throw parties, didn't make noise, and didn't raise red flags, at least not at first. That's what made it all the more chilling. While he appeared to be a dedicated law student during the day, at night his appetite for control and violence began to spiral. Utah marked a shift in Bundy's behavior, no longer just fantasizing or testing limits. He was actively hunting. Several women went missing during the time he lived in that Salt Lake City apartment, and law enforcement would later link him to multiple crimes across the region. Some survivors of his attacks remembered him pretending to be injured or needing help. Classic manipulations that allowed him to lure victims without raising suspicion. Inside that small apartment, Bundy kept trophies from his crimes, objects that helped him relive the moments and maintain a sense of power. The apartment wasn't flashy or unusual, but it served its purpose. A place to hide, a place to plan, and a place where his two lives, law student and predator, collided. Even the fire escape became part of his escape routes during tense moments when authorities were closing in. Bundy's time in Utah also marked the beginning of his unraveling. In August 1975, he was pulled over by police and arrested for attempted kidnapping. The search of his car led to disturbing discoveries: handcuffs, a ski mask, a crowbar, and other tools that had no innocent explanation. This arrest would be the first real crack in the persona he had carefully built. But even after his arrest, his Salt Lake City apartment remained a focal point in investigations. Authorities combed through the space for clues, hoping to find connections to the growing number of missing women. While Bundy's ability to cover his tracks was disturbingly effective, the apartment served as a physical reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself. It can live quietly behind a perfectly normal-looking front door. After his 1975 arrest in Utah, Ted Bundy's double life began to unravel fast, but not without a fight. In true Bundy fashion, he wasn't going to go down quietly. He was a master manipulator, and prison didn't change that. While awaiting trial, he planned and executed not one, but two dramatic escapes that would lead him to his final and most brutal chapter. Bundy's first escape came in June 1977. He jumped out of a second-story window at the Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen, Colorado, where he was researching his own defense. He was recaptured after 6 days in the woods. But just a few months later, in December, he pulled off a second escape, this time from the Garfield County Jail. After losing a significant amount of weight and squeezing through a hole in the ceiling of his cell, he walked right out the front door. From there, Bundy made his way across the country to Florida, traveling under stolen identities and keeping a low profile. He eventually landed in Tallahassee, where he rented a room under the alias Chris Hagen at a boarding house near Florida State University. This simple room with its plain walls and shared kitchen looked like it belonged to any struggling student, but within a matter of weeks, it would be the scene of unspeakable horror. On January 15, 1978, just weeks after arriving in Florida, Bundy broke into the Chi Omega sorority house on the FSU campus. What happened next was pure savagery. 2 women were murdered, and 2 others were left severely injured in an attack that lasted less than 15 minutes. The calm, composed man who once charmed professors and politicians had fully revealed the monster he always was. Later that same night, Bundy attacked another woman just a few blocks away. Then, weeks later, he abducted and murdered 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, his youngest known victim. By this point, law enforcement across the country was hunting for him. When he was finally pulled over and arrested on February 15, 1978 in Pensacola, Florida, the manhunt came to a close. Bundy's final years were spent behind bars at Florida State Prison. His cell there was stark and bare, a far cry from the suburban homes and cozy apartments he had once occupied. For the first time, he was fully stripped of his control. Yet even then, he tried to manipulate the system, offering confessions in exchange for stalling his execution. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair. Outside the prison, crowds cheered and held signs reading "Burn, Bundy, burn." It was a grim end to a life defined by deception, brutality, and twisted charisma. Looking back at the places he lived, the modest house in Tacoma, the apartment in Salt Lake City, the quiet room in Tallahassee, they all shared one thing in common: they looked normal. And that's what made Bundy so terrifying. He didn't fit the mold of a monster. He lived among us, looked like everyone else, and that's why he got away with it for so long. Bundy's story is a haunting reminder that evil doesn't always scream. It can smile, shake your hand, and live quietly behind your neighbor's front door. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.